The next thing we're going to look at with vMotion is enhanced vMotion compatibility. Now, I mentioned before that the CPUs in both hosts need to be from the same vendor. They need to be the same, basically the same processor fundamentally. And that's because when the VM was started, it presented to the virtual machine, vSphere presented to the virtual machine a particular processor. It said you've got 2 of these processors and they're 4-core each. These are the features they've got. This is their clock speed, and the VM is running on that basis. And there's nothing in the operating systems of today that can tolerate a sudden change of that the VM can say, actually, suddenly your processor changed to a completely different version. And that's where enhanced vMotion compatibility comes in. When you do have a situation where you've got some hosts in your environment that are on newer processors, what you can do is you can use enhanced vMotion compatibility to set a baseline across the whole cluster. So you can say we have at least this generation of processor in all of our hosts. Now, the trouble is that does disable some of the newer features on your newer processors, because it essentially masks across all of your hosts a specific version of processor. So when you try to move from one host to the other, it doesn't have to tell the host about a new CPU version. So it's handy for when you are in this situation, but if you can keep all of your hosts on a constant CPU type, that will be good. Now, enhanced vMotion compatibility cannot allow us to move between AMD and Intel hosts. It cannot be done. You cannot move from Intel to AMD hosts. Full stop, unfortunately. We right click on our cluster, go to settings. We have VMware EVC Enhanced vMotion Compatibility. I'm going to go edit, and we can say either enable for AMD hosts or enable for Intel hosts. So again, do not mix AMD and Intel hosts in the same cluster. You're going to run into difficulties with vMotion and DRS when we come to that shortly as well. And what you do is you say the baseline version of processor that you have. So if you specify Intel Merom generation, then it will allow all of these host types to enter the cluster. But every single virtual machine on all of the hosts in this cluster will be presented with an Intel Merom generation processor. So if there are features in, say, the Intel Haswell generation processors that are critical to your VM, you're going to cut those out. Now, a big example of that is a few years back, Intel added AES-256 hardware capabilities to their processors. So at that point, if you were using EVC for your hosts, you would lose that advantage. Generally, they're fairly small things. You probably won't notice, but that is the trade-off. We take a look at some of the other options. If we say Skylake, we get some more information here. We can see we are only allowing Skylake and newer processors into our cluster. So if we've got any processors that are older than that, we can't do that. Same with AMD hosts. So if we enable AMD Opteron Generation 1, then we'll allow Generation 1, 2, and 3 into the cluster. We say Generation 4, then we allow some of these. So you can see you get a bit more compatibility the more recent you go. So you want to set that to the most recent baseline you can. So if you've got some hosts, if you've got one host that's on Merom, then you're going to have to go to Merom and you're going to disable all of the features in your newer host. It's handy for migrations. If you imagine you've just bought some new hosts, you want to maintain compatibility for now, and then when you've retired your old hosts, you're going to turn off EVC. But ideally, design your clusters so you don't need to use EVC. Now, vMotion is included in many of the vSphere licenses, including the Essentials Plus pack that's used by small businesses, vSphere Standard, and of course the fully featured Enterprise Plus. One provision, though, is there needs to be a maximum of 4 millisecond latency between your hosts. However, we're starting with vSphere 6. We introduced long distance vMotion, which allows vMotions on networks where the latency is as much as 150. That is based on the round trip time, not necessarily one-way latency, I should clarify. Long distance vMotion requires an Enterprise Plus license. It is not included in any of the other license levels. So if you have Enterprise Plus, it's up to 150 millisecond round trip time. If you are not using Enterprise Plus, then your latency needs to be a maximum of 4 milliseconds between your hosts to support vMotion.